is Julia Schumacher. I am blessed to be facilitating a wonderful keynote panel this morning. So I just want to take a chance to introduce the four leaders in our community who have given their time this morning to speak with us and just sort of have an open conversation about some of the issues that we're going to talk about today in our workshops and in our assemblies for our benefit. So to my left, we have Malika Musa. Malika is a senior at Hopkins High School. Yep, let's clap. Absolutely. Malika has been involved in a bunch of different organizations around the Twin Cities, and she also was instrumental in organizing a walkout at Hopkins to protest racial inequality at that school. Next we have Brian Lazensky. Yep, go ahead, give him a round of applause. Brian is the coordinator of Uhuru Youth Scholars with NCAD, the Network for Development of Children of African Descent that does work in both Minneapolis and St. Paul. He's also a PhD candidate at the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at the University of Minnesota. So thanks, Brian, for being here. Next, we've got Pia Ping Shannon. Pia has been teaching in the Minneapolis Public Schools for many years. She's currently at Nellie Stone Johnson, and she is an ELA, English Language Arts Specialist. And I love this quote that is actually on the Nellie Stone Johnson website on her page that says she believes that every student has the capacity to learn and become a critical thinker. So thanks, Pia. Finally, Jamal Abdur Salam. Sorry, got some famous in the building, awesome. So Jamal is currently an administrator at Wellstone Elementary, and he does special projects that include a lot of really cool things, including visiting parents in their homes, so parent-teacher conferences in the home, as well as the drum line. So I hope that some of you, if you have not yet been blessed by seeing the drum line, that you will very soon get a chance to see that. So thanks so much, Jamal, for being here as well. Okay, so I think we'll start today not by talking necessarily really specifically about the different projects that these wonderful people do, although I hope that those come up in our conversation. The first question that I have for our panelists is, how would you describe racial justice in education in your own words? Go ahead and take some time to think about that. Let me know if anybody wants to start.
Sure, I'm not gonna water over. I guess when I think about racial justice in education, and I do a lot of thinking about racial justice in education, for me it has to start with an understanding, a deep racial literacy that I think is definitely not the norm in the United States. So for me, it's really about understanding structural white supremacy and how that manifests itself in schools. And so, for example, when I say structural white supremacy, what does that look like in education? One, it looks like the systematic exclusion of teachers of color, right? So when we look around this room today, the diversity and representation here is not the diversity and representation that's broadly what we see in the teacher pool around the state and around the country. And that's not accidental, right? There are ways that these systems reproduce and recycle themselves to create structures that limit who has access to certain spaces. And teacher education is one of those spaces. So when we think about who do colleges recruit, what are the barriers for recruiting, low-income teachers, teachers of color, teachers that have experienced educational hardship and then overcome those hardships, which I think would be incredible people to have in the classroom. There are barriers that we put in the way of recruiting folks like that. And then secondly, that creates a cultural, a homogeneous culture in schools, right? That's kind of based on a very white middle class norm. And if you don't ascribe to that white middle class norm, you kind of get pushed to the sides. And you have to learn to take on that norm. And our students, and young people do that with varying degrees of success. But unfortunately, that's what they get measured on. And I'll stop it. Just also, structurally looking at things like curriculum, right? Obviously, what are the things that we teach, right? Whose stories are we telling? And it's not just about multicultural inclusion in the classroom, but it's about an extreme discomfort with status quo, when it's an unjust status quo. So how do we develop a disposition in young people that they have an extreme discomfort, where they want to walk out of the school because of the status quo, right? And how do we get teachers that also walk out of the school because of the status quo until something can be drastically altered? So I guess that's where I'll stop there.
When I think about racial justice and education, and the lens I come from as born in the late 60s, growing up in the 70s and 80s, being a child of a chairman of the Black Panther Party, having to sit around on Saturdays and do school at home, where I was taught my history, where I was taught the history of others at a table. That's why I learned to read. That's why I learned to write at home. But when I look at it, the way I came into education was very unorthodox. I graduated with my BA in English, and I said, okay, I'm gonna go home and visit my brothers for a couple of weeks, and then I'm gonna go somewhere else, and I'm going to law school. I got here, my brother said, so since you're here for 2 weeks, look for a job. That's how I ended up as a teacher at Street Academy. And that was the most enlightening experience I have ever had, because I saw myself in those youth. The struggle that I had trying to get through school, the struggles that I had with teachers telling me in middle school that you will never amount to anything, you're just dumb and ignorant. I saw that in their voices. I saw the pain that they had that they had forced upon them in traditional schools. And that's why they were in an alternative school, an alternative setting, because they could not assimilate. I learned how to do education. That's why I was able to get through, but a lot of our kids don't. And it's a system that's designed and set up for failure. Failure for students of color. And it needs to change. It's institutional racism. It's not by chance. It is deeply ingrained within the systems, and that is why so many of our students never see teachers who look like them. That's why. I came in through a program, Collaborative Urban Educator Program, which was an agreement between Minneapolis Public Schools and University of St. Thomas. They were looking for teachers, people of color who had had experience working with children, and because there was a need for teachers of color. I went through that program, but that program was soon defunded. So that stopped the pipeline of teachers of color. That stopped that. That set up the next barrier, because now many of us have the money to go on and become teachers. And when you think about teaching and you grow up poor, it's not really the profession that's the first one that comes before you, because you know that your teachers were poor and they were always complaining about money. So that's not, when you're coming from the ghetto, that's not what you want to do. And I think that we need to set up the system so that it is attractive to our students. Let's grow our own. If we start at K-12, start growing our own teachers within our communities, then we can open up that pipeline so that more and more of our students of color see teachers who look like them, whom they can identify with.
So, I'm short. Can everyone see me? Okay. I would describe, there's 3 words I would use. So when I think of describe, I think of adjectives, all right? I would say that it's inconsistent. I would say that it's irrational and untrustworthy. I mean, for students to come into a classroom and expect to be educated, but the curriculum that's thrown at us has nothing, like, it doesn't relate to me. I can't relate to it. How would I be able to learn it? Like, you had a really, really good point. I mean, the curriculum has always been a problem for me. I hated walking into my history. I love history. History is my favorite subject. But I hated walking into my history class and then, my teacher teaching me about some guy that's so-called found America. Like, hold up, put the brakes, that's not true. What really happened? Tell me what really went on, because there was things that happened before that, you just are not capturing it because it had nothing to do with other people. Like, it had nothing to do with your people, so you can't capture that information. Therefore, you think that it's not worthy enough for you to teach it. There was a lot of untrust with me, and educators with me, and administrators with me, and people who just did not look like me simply because they could not understand where I came from. I always say this thing, well, I have to remember, I have to be able to maneuver through a system that wasn't built to protect me. So that's the one thing I always do. It's like a motto for me. Maneuver, not break down, not adjust, but maneuver through a system that was not built to protect me. So yeah, those are the 3 words: inconsistent, irrational, and untrustworthy.
All right, good morning everybody. I'm very humble and thankful to be able to share some thoughts with you this morning. The first thing I thought when I pulled up this morning to this school was, wow, I wish we could have a space that looked a lot like Eden Prairies. Or Wyzetta. I wish we could just, Monticello, not even, I'll stop somewhere, right? Environment. When I think of how I want to answer this question, I'm thinking of, and in reference to the discourse of education, I'm really thinking about how we educate the whole student. The whole student. So I'm thinking about the triangle of family, community, and school. And I truly believe that if one of those pieces is missing, that right there should explain the gap to you. That should explain the achievement gap. And so I want to definitely be clear about that first and foremost this morning. I wanted to go last because I wanted to hear the sister on the end speak. I wanted to hear how we are empowering our students' rich voices, bringing into focus multiple perspectives. Shout out to my Wellstone peeps back there, right? That's our theme for the year at our school. How do we do that? How do we empower our students' rich voices and bring into focus multiple perspectives? Well, let's just sit on that for a second. And so we gotta be thinking about ways that identity can show up. How do we tap into the potential of our students? How do we help them realize that the work they are doing here in these schools is relevant to where they come from and what they have to do when they get that knowledge of self, when they get that real understanding and how they need to take it back to their communities. I was standing in a room full of young men most recently doing a retreat called Man to Man, King to King. And the first place we started at was our names. And they said, well, what does Jamal Abdul-Salam mean? And I said, well, it means handsome, kingly servant of peace. and there was a couple cellos in the room. You can feel free to have yours. I don't think these gentlemen thought that I was a handsome, kingly servant of peace. But I want to say this, that along with that brand, I got to tell them about the work that I'm doing to get back into the community and reach out and land the stuff that I do in the school there. I said, part of that brand, part of the meaning of that name is what I'm doing under it right now. And no kid in the room could raise their hand and say what their name meant. So we had to come up with a way to define that right there. And I thought, to me, this is the kind of work that has to find its way to school. You're sitting in the classroom, you don't have a chance to really examine who you are or get back to your root or to see how your culture applies. I mean, look around this space. I know the kids that attend this school. And the first thing I should have saw when I walked in the building is some representation of who they are and where they come from, their history. The real history. I'm not talking about the civil rights traumatic parts of it. I'm talking about the men and women right now who are making things happen in their community that these kids have to go back and take their rightful place in. And so it's really about environment for me. It's about how you keep that triangle connected. Family, community, and school. When I think of how to define racial justice, I think of that's the work that we need to be doing. Teaching our students to speak their truth and stand in their truth. So I'm happy that I got a chance to hear you speak first before I did. All right, let's keep rolling.
Thank you so much. I have so many questions written down on my list, and I look at the time and it looks like we only have 15 minutes left. So we're just gonna work on it. We're gonna keep working on it. And there's so much, you guys have so much to say and so much to teach us, so thank you. I think I'll skip to this question here. What and who inspired and inspires you to do the work that you do for racial justice in education? What and who inspires you?
The who would be my mother. Bless her soul. She drugged me and my brothers around to, I don't know, there was always a movement, there was always a protest, there was always a campaign, and we were drugged around because she said that you have to fight for your people. When you get to a place where you can give back, you have to give back in whatever way you can. And that has been my grounding motto. I want to give back. I don't want to run away because too many of our kids need us. And that has been that grounding base for me. Don't run, don't hide, give back. Teach our kids how to fight. Teach our kids how to stand up for their rights. Let them know that they do have rights. Let them know that they do have a place in this society. Even though barriers may be thrown up, even though there's obstacles that they are going to have to overcome. Let them know that they are capable, that they are intelligent, and they can do this. And that's the one, I believe between her and my aunt, those are the people that instill that within me, that this is a continuous fight and you have no time to lay down. Because too many of our people are depending on you, and if you ever get in a place where your voice can be heard, let it be heard and speak on behalf of your people. So that's where I come from, and it's just the who for me. It's not the what, it's the who. And the who for me are the children. And the who for me are the people who struggle on a day-to-day basis, trying to be heard. But because they don't have the money or the wealth, they can't get in the door. Their voices are not heard. So that's what motivates me, that's what moves me to step into this fight for racial justice, because I stepped back and I listened and I observed for years and I didn't say anything. But this year I said, you know what? You're getting older. What do you have to lose? So I'm out here and I'm speaking my mind, because I think that someone has to tell the truth. Someone has to tell the truth. Because if you're not going to tell the truth, then your voice shouldn't even be heard.
I'm just going to give y'all a quick list of things, because I know I'm probably not going to get another opportunity here. It's definitely a need to move beyond tolerance. You know, I am so tired of celebrating what was. I am so about the business of reinventing, of creating another space that our kids can come back to and say, okay, there's something for me there. I'm in that stage of my life now. I don't know where you're at, but I'm in that stage of my life where I want to see the fruit of all the hard work we're doing in the communities that I live in. I'm living, it's my experience. And now having to live my experience as an African American male through my sons, seeing them still living in black pods in white communities with limited access to the good neighborhoods around them. Living my reality, and that there's not a whole lot I can do about it on my own. And so I'm ready to stand up and march to make it a little bit easier for the folks coming by. It's time to pay it forward. Martin and Malcolm would certainly want me to be doing that kind of work. And I feel like it's my turn to pay it forward. So I'm about that business. I understand that we don't own enough houses, that the economic development is crazy, that healthcare isn't on my side right now, the criminal justice, right? And I know where it starts, with the education, knowing your story, and knowing your reality, and not getting the watered down version of it. And so, the only other work I would do besides what I'm doing right now, alongside that, is making sure that we have something established that we can come back to. And that's for all kids and all families, that we have something to come back to and say, okay, here's where my learning belongs. It's my turn now to live everything up. I'll close with this. Michael Eric Dyson said, lift their dreams and their pants will follow. I'll let that sit with you for a second. And so that's really how I would define my work. Lift their dreams and their pants will follow.
Okay. So the question was, what and who inspires you? The who, I know he's not here right now, and you probably will hear that I gave him a shout out, but his name is Terrell Lewis. I know Anthony knows who he is. I've known him for almost all my life. And this guy has probably, I don't know anyone who knows how to work with kids well. You can easily say you're an educator. You can easily say you work with kids. It's so easy to say that, but for a person who can easily assimilate themselves with kids, I get amazed by just seeing him work with other kids. He's worked with me for over 7 years, but when I see him work with other kids, like the love never runs out. And I know love isn't supposed to, but his loyalty doesn't run out. And I felt like he's just probably one of the most amazing people I have ever in my life met. And I will say that I have ever in my life met. And then also my dad, my father, he is also a Muslim man. He grew up in Djibouti, which is East Coast of Africa, and he was a rebel, he was a fighter. He fought for his country with the citizens because the government was being corrupt. That was a more direct thing, but what's going on here is not, it's indirect, but it's almost the same thing. It's almost the same thing, and it hurts me. And it hurt my dad too, because like he sees it within us, and he was surprised. The dad told him we were going to walk out of Hopkins High School. My dad said, "Do you want me there?" And I told him, if we have parents there, it might be a little more bigger than what it needs to be. I just need to create awareness. In order for me to create any type of change, people need to be aware. So you just stay there. And then he was just like, "All right, cool. Just let me know if I should be there." I'm like, "All right, My dad is probably the most, he has to be, he's amazing, right? That guy's amazing. He's funny, he's like 5'3", but he's amazing. And then also the youth. There's a lot of youth who look up to me, and, well, maybe not up, maybe look down to me, but there's a lot of youth that come to me and like, believe, okay, well, I have this problem with this teacher. She's just not understanding who I am. She doesn't understand this is what I do. She doesn't know that I work like right after school. I have to take care of my brothers. Like she doesn't know how I live. So when I come to school in the morning, she expects me to do like 6 math problems at 7:47 in the morning. I don't know what to do. Like there are people who struggle in class because of the things that happen outside of school. School is not their only priority. So I think the youth have also encouraged me. And then the what. I don't know if you guys know what this is, but the new Jim Crow. That's the what for me. It's not the old one, but the new one. This thing is invisible, but it's here. The graduation rates amongst African American students, students of color, English second learning students, those are also the what. Like that's why I do what I do. And then the kids who've always been labeled, they have been labeled. The youth that have been labeled. I don't care what color you are. You could be a Caucasian person, and if you have been labeled, then I'm also fighting for you. So that's the one.
I'll keep mine really short. My students inspire me. We hear a brother who shared the poem at the beginning of the session, right? And to just understand the linguistic and technical mastery that had to go into sharing something like that, and yet if he can't conform what he just did to a 5-paragraph essay that demonstrates such and such, then he's deemed not worthy, right? So I see too many folks that have this brilliance that it gets beaten out of them to the point where they just don't care. And that's what inspires me, because when we have a school system, an education system that beats brilliance out of people, that's just something that I can't go with the flow on that. So.
I just want a public service announcement. We're going to continue the panel just a little bit into passing time so that we can do one more question. I think the question we'll end with is, where do you see opportunities for growth in the movement for racial justice in education? I know when I look out at this room of people, I see lots of people I know who inspire me, and I bet that's true for a lot of you. And so, what can we do moving forward? What does the growth in the movement look like to you all?
Let's do it. Here we go, right here. Yeah. Let's go get
it. Definitely in the pedagogy, the curriculum, the Eurocentric curriculum that we're constantly teaching through effortlessly, daily. It's time for us to make that a little more culturally relevant, to stay short, right? We can do a lot to make over our environment, and we can stop thinking that the only place to make a difference is between these 4 walls. And in order to educate the whole student, you've got to be willing to meet them on their turf. See, because if I can see where you come from and what things look like in your families, what really makes you who you are, when you hit my classroom, I'm going to be able to work with you a little bit differently. Shout out to Nick Faber and Maisha in the back of the room back there. They'll be giving you some insight on how to get out and visit with families and meet them on their turf just a little bit later on here. So I want to definitely say that in order to understand where you need to take your teaching or your practice in the classroom next, you might want to extend your relationship with your students beyond these 4 walls. Let's let that sit in the air. I'm good at letting things sit in the air for a second. And so, just to conclude with my statement here, I think we can know, I'm going to say what one of my colleagues said to me, we can no longer continue to pay the minimum balance on the credit card. Because if we do, It'll take us another 25 years to pay this whole thing off. So let's stop doing the minimum and go above and beyond so we can get with our kids and really, really make this school thing a little more meaningful. Can't just continue to do just a little bit. We got to stand tall now. We got to bust through the door at this point. You know, we got to really go get it now. We have to do that whatever it takes model. Finland, not I'm just one person. We have to adopt that Finland model and do whatever it takes at this point. That means you get out and experience some discomfort with children standing in their truth. Let's go get it.
I was going to say curriculum and pedagogy myself, but there's a lot of space with the curriculum and the pedagogy and only teaching from a Eurocentric perspective, not paying attention to the different modalities that our students learn within. The curriculum has been narrowed so much due to high stakes testing that we've removed so much from our children. The arts, the things that they need in order to, those kids that like to move around, the gym, the music, all of that has been removed, and we're only stuck at reading and writing and the reading and math, not even writing. And the world is much bigger. And if we expect for our children to be educated on the whole, then we have to put those things back into the classrooms, back into the schools. And then to accept the fact that teachers don't solve everything. We don't know everything. I learn every day from my students and my parents. I can tell you I don't know everything. And for the politicians, I told a politician last night, just please come into my classroom, bring all of your colleagues, come to the teacher's classroom, step in these walls. You can have my class for a day. And tell me how your experience went. Tell me, what did you solve? What did you do? How did you attend to their needs? Did you give that hug when that kid just ran and barreled and almost knocked you down because they needed a hug right then and there? Or did you say, move back? What did you do? I think there has to be, there's also room for mobilizing parents and mobilizing community. Because if we mobilize parents and we get parents active and we get the community active and we march over to the legislation when they're passing all these stupid laws and tell them, I want the same education for my child that you want for your child. That's what we have to do, because I was told last night, and I will quote, Senator Patricia Torres Ray said the way to get things done is to pull together the parents, the community, and the teachers and march over to the legislators and tell them what we need, and we will get it. I was told that from her last night. So we need to start mobilizing our parents, we need to start mobilizing our students, because the power is in the youth. Because the youth go over to the legislation, they tell them what we need. This is what we want. We don't want any more standardized tests. Our teachers do that on a regular basis. And if you're a teacher worth your salt, you are assessing continuously and you know what your kids need. If you are worth your salt. So a standardized test is not going to make or break these kids, and they know it. That's why they sit there and they're done in 10 minutes. They don't feel like bubbling it in. I have a son that does that. So we have to organize our students, organize our parents, organize our community. There's room for growth. There's room to get some action done. – 'Let's get it.
'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. 'Let's get it. '
But I think the space to really look at is how do we just expand our conception of what education really is. You know, we really do not give our young people enough credit. We trivialize education. We make them think that these kind of like abstract, you know, issues are what they should be concerned with instead of being concerned with like real life issues. I mean, we're facing so many things, right, in terms of whether it's, you know, climate change, or whether it's, you know, the economy, or whether it's, you know, police repression in communities, or whether it's, you know, all of these these should be the things that are the units of analyses in our classrooms and in our community spaces. To be, again, broadening the classroom outside of the four walls is critical. But really, like, having our students study things that are real life problems, right? And then you can get to all of the standards and all the, you know, all that stuff through those things. Like, what, you know, and on top of that, it's extremely relevant. You know, so like, for instance, my work, my students are engaged in community action research, based on whatever they want to study, right? Whatever is relevant to them. Right? We are adaptable enough that we can take any unit of analysis and get them to where they need to be by looking at a problem, investigating it, doing background research, trying to figure out what have people been saying about this, and not just, you know, the mainstream newspapers and journals, but what do people in your community say? What do storytellers? What are the oral histories that are involved in this, right? And being able to look at those things, being able to pull apart, being critical, and being able to pick apart data, being able to articulate a new idea, synthesize something that they haven't thought about before, right? And what you start to see is that all the stuff that we try to test young people on, they start to show all of those things anyway, right? So you know, I talk to parents all the time they tell me, I want my kids to be able to pass these tests so they can go to college, right? And I can't just sit there and ignore them like, oh, well, the tests don't really mean anything, because the tests these are the barriers that people are putting in front of us, right? So my question is, how do I do both, right? How do I get students to be able to expand their educational understanding of what that really means, critique their own educational space, critique their teachers, critique their curriculum, critique everything that's going on around them, and then also be able to sit down and take a puny test, which really is just a very small representation of what they actually need to do when we broaden the curriculum. So that's where I think we need to start heading.
For me, because I'm a student, I think opportunity for growth is the classroom. A lot of the stuff I bring into the classroom are not things that I've learned in the classroom. So all three of you guys have said it. It's I would like to learn the things that I do outside of class in class, so that I wouldn't have to use that extra 3.5 hours a week to go, you know, across town to find this one place with this wonderful group and learn these skills. Like, I would love to be able to do that in class. But what I mean by classroom, I mean changing the classroom dynamics to fit each class. And I know we got some teachers out there, and there are some teachers that say, I have heard this plenty of times, I've been doing this for 13 years, and it's worked all 13 years. Well, listen, it's not working the 14th. Can you change it up, please? And it's always been my response. Like, you know, I'm like, all right, cool. You're not going to teach your first period class like how you would teach your third and your fourth period class. You're not going to teach your last period class how you would your first, because, you know, they don't have that same energy. They may be tired in the morning, so you do the same work, but probably give it to them differently. There are teachers who are just not willing to do that, and I think if teachers kind of just humble themselves a little bit more, I mean, I give you guys great guidance, as a matter of fact. Thank you to all the teachers out there. But the thing is, a lot of teachers, some teachers, let me rephrase it, some teachers don't humble themselves to understand that not all students learn the same way. Even though that's what you guys are taught, you guys, it's like it's not even put into practice that not all students learn the same way. And by having all your classes taught the same way, when you have one class that's full of African American students, and the other class is full of all honor roll students, like, how do you teach them the same way? You cannot do that. You have to change your classroom dynamics in order to fit that class. And that's always been the thing for me. And then for us, you've obviously probably taken positions that we complain about. Later on, if we complain that our teachers don't know how to do their job, then why don't we go into teaching? So we change it up. For law, for us who don't like the law, or I know plenty of people, I have young men as friends that don't like the law. They do not like police officers. Matter of fact, if you're a police officer, these kids are nowhere to be found. Why don't you become a police officer? Become that police officer and change it up. So,